Coming up on Arirang News, President Moon Jae-in tells his ministers to move quickly to approve a second extra budget for this year to revive the economy. The government's also unveiled a plan to do that, which includes a large amount of discount coupons to boost consumer spending. The Finance Ministry announces plans to expand state employment insurance to more types of workers in jobs that are not salary-based, like delivery drivers. It's also lowering the maximum interest rates on loans from the current 24% to 20%. And South Korea reports just over 500 new cases of COVID-19, a sharp decline from yesterday. Starting in July, the distancing rules will be eased across the country, meaning restaurants, bars, and cafes can stay open later. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The Korean government says its priority in the second half of the year is going to be creating jobs and reducing the income gap, which has been widening. President Moon Jae-in hosted an expanded meeting of economy-related ministers on Monday and said South Korea aims to reach 4% economic growth this year. He asked his ministers to quickly move ahead with this year's second extra budget since the government's fiscal situation has improved as well. Take a listen.
30조 원을 넘을 것으로 예상되는 초과 세수를 경제 활력을 더 높이고 어려운 국민의 삶을 뒷받침하는 데 활용할 수 있도록 2차 추경을 신속하게 추진해 주기 바랍니다. 큰 폭의 초과 세수야말로 확장 재정의 선순환 효과이자 경기 회복의 확실한 징표라고 할 수 있습니다.
President Moon also asked the ministers to come up with a wide range of policies to improve the tax system and the government's finances. And the government released its economic policy plan for the second half of this year. In addition to its big picture fiscal policies, it's going to try to boost consumption and revitalize the economy by offering discount coupons and giving out cash-back rewards for credit card spending. The government also aims to create thousands more jobs. Bae-Eun-ji reports.
South Korea's economy is projected to grow by 4.2% by the end of this year, and increase by another 3% in 2022. To achieve this level of economic growth, the Finance Ministry on Monday laid out its economic policy plan for the second half of this year. To boost spending, the government plans to offer 6 types of discount coupons in addition to the ones already distributed. These new types of coupons will be focused on businesses that were hit hard by the pandemic, including farming and fishery products, gyms, sports venues, the culture sector, movies, railways, and buses. This will be done through the country's supplementary budget, the second of its kind so far this year. Though further details on this extra budget are yet to be revealed, the Finance Ministry said last week that it is going to allocate more than $26.5 billion for the extra budget. The government will also give out cashback rewards for credit card spending. Each consumer can get back up to 300,000 Korean won, or about $265. This will also be done using the supplementary budget, and a total of about $885 million has been allocated for this cashback reward plan. To resume overseas travel, the government aims in July to set up a so-called travel bubble where people can travel between certain countries without the need for quarantine. As for the job market, the government aims to increase the number of people employed in 2021 by 250,000 and have another 250,000 more employed by the end of next year. To do this, it plans to create more than 150,000 new jobs within the second half of this year. It will also provide financial support in the fast-developing fields of AI and programming, as well as in the art, culture, and travel industries, which have been struggling since the outbreak. And for small businesses, the government will pass a bill next month that will compensate them for losses caused by COVID-19. This includes businesses where operations were halted or restricted by the government's social distancing policies. Bae-Eun-ji, Arirang News.
South Korea's finance ministry has also announced some new policies taking effect next month to boost the economy. It's going to expand state employment insurance for irregular types of jobs that previously were not eligible for it. It's also expanding the 52-hour workweek limit to smaller companies. Min Soo-kyun reports.
Starting next month, more types of work will be included under the state employment insurance. This includes employees hired under special contracts such as insurance agents, parcel delivery workers, door-to-door salespeople, and after-school instructors. They now can receive unemployment benefits when they lose their jobs and can apply for benefits related to maternity leave. But those whose monthly earnings are below $710 will not be eligible, nor will those aged 65 and older. The insurance premium is set at 1.4%, with the employee and employer each required to pay half of the fee. The government aims to extend its employment insurance to all employees by 2025. South Korea will also expand its 52-hour work week to smaller companies. Currently, the weekly hours only apply to firms with 50 or more employees. But from July 1st, this will be extended to businesses with between 5 and 49 workers. Those with fewer than 5 workers will not be affected. The country started phasing in the 52-hour workweek scheme from 2018 to improve working conditions for employees. Starting July, the length of visas for foreigners will be limited to their passport expiration date. This means an applicant whose passport is set to expire in 6 months can only be granted with a 6-month stay, even if he or she is eligible for a 2-year extension. The country had previously been granting period of stay extensions for foreigners regardless of their passport validity. But the change comes as there have been difficulties in accurately tracking the immigration status of foreigners in Korea. The measure, however, will not apply to permanent resident, recognized refugee, and humanitarian status visa holders. The Ministry of Justice recommends that foreigners check their passport and renew them if necessary ahead of their visa application. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
And the Financial Services Commission is cutting the maximum legal interest rate next month from the current 24% down to 20%. The FSC says it wants to ease the financial burden on those with large debts. The lower limit will take effect from July 7th. It'll apply to loans from financial institutions and loans from private lenders worth over 100,000 won, or about $88. This will not affect loans made prior to July 7th. Now, our Seo Eun-kyung has a look ahead at the economic news to come this week. South Korea will have a slew of new data on trade and consumer prices, which will show to what extent the recent surge in inflation is continuing. And in the U.S., the Biden administration is hoping that jobs data show that employment is getting back to pre-pandemic levels.
The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy will release export and import figures for June on Thursday. Preliminary data from the Korea Customs Service show that trade volume in the first 20 days of June surged compared to the same period last year. Exports increased by almost 30%, and average daily exports were up over 33%, showing continuing recovery in outbound shipments. Compared to the same period last year, exports of automobiles, petroleum products, and semiconductors largely contributed to the increase. Imports were up by almost 29%. Crude oil, petroleum products, and automobiles were the major contributors to the rise. Statistics Korea on Friday is set to release the Consumer Price Index for June. Consumer prices in May recorded their biggest on-year increase in 9 years. They came largely on the back of a rise in oil prices, which were up by more than 23%, the biggest jump in almost 13 years. This led to an increase in the price of petroleum products. The agency attributed the jump to low base effects from poor oil demand due to coronavirus-led recessions. Since the Consumer Price Index is one of the major barometers of inflation, all eyes are on whether the figure will continue to rise in June. On the same day, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics will release its unemployment rate for June. The national rate stood at 5.8% in May, declining 0.3% from a month before. The figure was down considerably from its high of near 15% in April last year. However, the rate remains above the pre-COVID-19 pandemic level, which was 3.5% in February 2020. Since the U.S. has been showing strong signs of economic recovery, the unemployment rate is largely expected to decline in June. The figure has been on a continuous decline since reaching a record high in April last year. 서은경, 아리랑 뉴스.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, good afternoon. Thank you for coming on today.
Happy to be here.
Well, stocks on Wall Street ended last week a fair bit higher. The Fed holding tight on interest rates and tapering. The S&P and the NASDAQ hit new highs during the session. What's the story on Wall Street, and what are we looking forward to this week?
Okay, well, the major U.S. indices, as you mentioned, the Dow had best week since March. It went, for the week, it rose 3.4%. S&P, it had its best week since February. It rose by 2.7% in the last week. And, of course, it had a record closing figure on Friday. NASDAQ, it was slightly down on Friday, less than 0.1%. But for the week, it rose by 2.4%. It was the best week it had since April. So why are all these U.S. stocks having such a good week? Well, the PCE, the personal consumption expenditure inflation figures came out last week, and the number was 3.9%. The core PCE inflation was 3.4%, so it was higher than it usually is. It's much higher than the 2% target that the Fed usually looks at. But if you look at the month-to-month figures, April to May, the figure was 0.4 for the PCE inflation and 0.5 for core PCE inflation, which was much less than expected. So the fear of inflation at least seems to be temporarily over. And then the U.S. markets seem to be discarding a lot of bad news. The Fed's noticed that the interest rate may go up earlier than expected. Consumer spending in May coming in less than expected. It did not increase, whereas analysts expected it to increase by 0.4%, and consumer income falling by 2.0%. These bad news do not seem to be affecting the stock market all that much. That may be because of the infrastructure plan that the Biden administration and the Republicans and the Democrats in the Congress agreed on. But even there, originally, President Biden wanted a $2 trillion infrastructure plan, but this infrastructure plan is only going to be $579 billion new spending. It's being billed as a $1 trillion infrastructure plan, but of that, about $420 billion is from spending that is already planned. So there will only be about $479 billion worth of new spending. But unlike the President Biden's original idea for the infrastructure plan, this new infrastructure plan will not involve any increases in taxes, at least for now. So that may have made the stock market more optimistic. Now, European markets, the DAX and CAC, it was fluctuating, but more or less level last week. So up and down, but basically level. FTSE UK, on the other hand, it has been rising for the week. Nikkei last week was mostly level, but Shanghai and Hang Seng, it was upward trending for most of last week.
And last Friday was a record for Korean stocks, too. The Kospi, for the first time, closing above 3,300 points. Today it was slightly under that number. The Kosdaq, though, rising again. Tell us about the domestic market.
Okay, well, Kospi did fall by 0.95 points, or 0.03%. So basically, it stayed level. Individual spot, institutions and foreigners sold. it was actually positive in the morning, but it fell in the late morning around 11 o'clock, and it could not make up the loss before the end of the trading day. But it is the second day over 3,300 mark, so that is psychologically important. But it does point out that investors seem to be running hot and cold. Whenever the numbers go up, people are all excited, but then once it goes up, they get nervous because, well, you hit historical highs, but you're not quite sure why. The coronavirus has not really improved the fundamentals of the Korean companies, but we keep on hitting all these historical highs. So there's more and more concern that perhaps the stock market is overheated. In the Bank of Korea's financial stability report that was published last week, it pointed out that the Korean stock market is rising higher than the U.S. markets, the advanced countries markets, and the emerging country markets, but the price-earnings ratio is on the lower side. So it was concerned that stock market as well as other asset markets like real estate may be overheated right now. Kosdaq, it rose 0.57% today, ended at 1,017.91. It has continually been over the 1,000 mark since the 17th. Individuals and foreigners bought and institutions sold.
And now if we could zoom in on Korea's biggest company, Samsung Electronics, and the broader semiconductor industry. Shares of Samsung were climbing sharply late last year and early this year, and many had expected its share price to reach 100,000 won, but it stalled out at around 80,000. Tell us about that and what this might indicate about the chip industry, Professor.
Okay, well, as I mentioned in the last question, the stock market does seem to be somewhat overheated, but why isn't Samsung rising or semiconductor industry rising as much as the other stocks? That is a bit hard to understand. Kospi and Kosdaq right now are running about 45% above the pre-corona highs. I'm not talking about from the low bottom that corona hit, but in February, before the coronavirus hit, starting from the high point that we had in February, Kospi and Kosdaq is about 45% above that right now. But Samsung is only about 32% higher than the pre-corona high. Hynix is only about 21% above the pre-corona high, which is somewhat surprising because the semiconductor industry has been the beneficiary of the coronavirus. Unlike the other industries, which was adversely affected by the coronavirus, the semiconductors were actually helped by the coronavirus. So it is strange why these rises are not as high as the stock market in general. Some people attribute this to the fact that Samsung Electronics is the increased rate of the profits are not as high as some people hoped, or some people are blaming the short selling that started a month ago. Samsung has been one of the largest targets for short selling, though unsuccessful, I should mention. Other companies that have been targets of short selling were Hyundai Merchant Marine HMM or LG Chemicals, which is a bit surprising because, well, these companies, again, the merchant marines, there's a shortage of marine transport right now, so there's excess demand. LG Chemicals, even though the LG Energy Solution will be spun off, they still are owners of the LG Energy Solution, which makes electric vehicle batteries. So if anything, these companies should be stronger, but they seem to be targets of short selling. So it seems like the excess liquidity that we see in the economy right now is making people do some strange things in the name of speculation.
Yeah, very odd choices for short selling, indeed, Professor. We'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights on that. We always appreciate it.
Thank you.
South Korea today reported a drop in new coronavirus cases, as is usual coming off the weekend when there are fewer tests conducted. It's almost down to 500 today, and that comes ahead of an easing of the distancing measures to take effect next month, which will mean bars, restaurants, and cafes can open later, and people can meet up in bigger groups. Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea on Monday reported 501 new COVID-19 cases, dropping below 600 for the first time in almost a week. Although the daily tally is down compared to recent days, this is mainly due to fewer tests happening over the weekend. Of the new cases, all but 29 were locally transmitted, with the capital region accounting for more than 75%. On top of continued cluster infections, health authorities are on alert over the Delta variant, first spotted in India. The more transmissible variant has so far been detected in 190 cases in South Korea. Experts say this could rise as many of imported cases are from countries where the Delta variant is spreading quickly. South Korea's total caseload has now surpassed 155,000, and 2 more deaths were confirmed Monday, raising the total death toll to 2,015. Despite the ongoing infections, the country is set to implement its new social distancing scheme from July 1st. The current 5-tier system will be switched to a 4-tier version. The Greater Seoul area will be under the new Level 2 with eased regulations on businesses and social gatherings. Under that level, businesses including restaurants, cafes, and bars will be able to operate for 2 extra hours until midnight. The limit on private gatherings will also be raised from 4 people to 6 for the first 2 weeks of July. After that, it'll be raised to 8. Meanwhile, regions outside the capital are set to enforce Level 1, the lowest on the new 4-tier scheme. Social gatherings of up to 8 people will be allowed in those regions except for Jeju, which will remain at 6 until mid-July. Chungcheongnam-do Province will impose no capacity limits at all. Businesses outside the Greater Seoul area will be exempt from restrictions as well. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
And South Korea is well ahead of its original goal of getting vaccine doses to a quarter of the population by the end of this month. But even though demand for vaccines is still high, it does not look like it'll be possible to reach the more ambitious revised goal of 30% by the end of this month. Right now, they're a little over 100,000 people short, with about 2 days left to go. Eun-jin reports.
From Monday to Wednesday, health authorities in South Korea are taking reservations for some 110,000 essential workers under the age of 30 who were not able to get vaccinated. These include police officers, firefighters, members of the Coast Guard, healthcare workers, as well as daycare teachers and caregivers. Originally scheduled to receive the AstraZeneca vaccine, this group has been regrouped to get the Pfizer jab due to the rare blood clotting side effect reported with AstraZeneca. Also eligible to make reservations over the next 3 days are those 60 to 74 who have yet to get a shot. Both groups are expected to get their first doses between the 5th and 17th of July. Second doses are scheduled between July 26th to August 7th. Since launching its vaccination campaign on February 26th, almost 15.3 million people in South Korea have received a first dose, and some 4.65 million have been fully vaccinated. 29.8% of the population have received first vaccinations, but in order to reach the government's goal of having 30% of the population inoculated by the first half of the year, more than 114,000 people need to get a shot over the coming days, a target that's not expected to be plausible before the month is out. Meanwhile, amid growing concerns over variants, AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford announced Sunday that they will begin clinical trials of a booster shot against the Beta variant that originated in South Africa. The trial will involve 2,250 people from the UK, South Africa, Brazil, and Poland that have received both doses of an mRNA vaccine. The results are expected before the end of the year. Eun-jin, Arirang News.
The city of Seoul is integrating AI into its CCTV systems to improve safety along the Han River. The technology will help rescue teams respond to suicide attempts and accidents. This is one of the many upgrades planned for Seoul in the second half of the year. Others include a new emergency room at Seoul Medical Center downtown, as well as support centers for startups and young people. The changes will be detailed Wednesday on the city government's website. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.